Welcome to the WRAL Daily Download. I'm Jack Hagel. The election, the economy, redistricting. 2022 was full of ammunition for politicians. They made statements, some true, some less than true, about all of those things and more. And WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht was there to check them and, when needed, call them out. He joins us today to break down the most popular fact checks of 2022 for PolitiFact North Carolina. Paul, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So before we get started on the top PolitiFacts, some context would help. Explain to our listeners, what is PolitiFact and what is its mission?
Right. PolitiFact is a nonprofit organization started about 15 years ago. And I would say it's probably the largest and most well-known fact-checking organization in the country. It's won a Pulitzer Prize for its work. It's best known for the Truthometer, right, which we use to measure the truthiness of statements that we fact check.
And so explain how you go about deciding what statements to check and the process we go through to check them.
Right. So we fact check politicians, government officials, people who are appointed, judges. You know, if you've seen them on the news, it's possible that we fact checked them before. And we look for things that are either controversial or just really important to public discourse. You know, back when the pandemic happened, we fact-checked things that were said about COVID and what was known at the time. And obviously this year being an election year, we fact-checked a lot of candidates. And you can imagine the range of subjects that we touched on. And so the process is always the same. We find a claim that is either interesting or controversial, and then we always reach out to the person who said it and ask, you know, hey, what is your source for this information? And then we do our own research. And in that case, it's the reporter, me. I go out and research the issue from credible sources, and I look at original documents. I don't just take someone's word for things. Usually I go look at studies, all that stuff, compile what I find, put it in a story, and then editors determine a rating. You know, we talk about whether or not the bulk of the evidence supports what the speaker said, and the speaker being the politician or whoever. And that's how we choose whether something is true, mostly true, half true, mostly false, or pants on fire, which means that something isn't just wrong, that it's ridiculous and, you know, may have even had some, you know, bad intent in there.
Okay, so you pulled all the readership numbers for PolitiFact North Carolina stories in 2022. What did you find out? I mean, were there any key themes that you noticed?
You know, I was surprised by just how many of the top issues made it into our list of most read fact checks in future years from now. When we look back at, what were the big issues of 2022? You know, you can look back at this list and sort of see what most of them were. There's, you know, there are fact checks about high crime. There's fact checks about inflation. There's fact checks about redistricting and immigrants being dropped off in the middle of the night. This list sort of captures a lot of the rhetoric that we heard on the campaign trail this year. A lot of these things a lot of these subjects in this list are what you might call Republican topics. They're the Republican concerns, right? Like immigration, Republican concern. Inflation, something they ran on. Even critical race theory. You know, years from now, we may look back on critical race theory and say like, oh, well, that emerged during the Biden years. You know, you can point to 2022, the midterm election, when Republicans ran against Biden and his White House and his agenda, and the Democrats in the House and Senate, and these will all look familiar to you. You'll say, yeah, that's right. So that is one thing that stood out to me.
So is there a reason that some of those issues maybe got more attention than, say, others?
When we do fact checks on TV here at WRAL, we don't always do local ones. Sometimes we do national fact checks, and often we fact check the president. And that's meant in recent years Donald Trump. That also means Joe Biden. And those guys are big drivers of traffic, of clicks, as a lot of people say. And what's interesting about this list for the top read PolitiFact NC fact checks of 2022 is that it was not personality driven. The top fact checks are not from people you might suspect. There's a former state legislator There's a state trooper on here. There's a Republican candidate who ran for Congress out in Charlotte who's not well known. He's in the top 3. So this list was really subject matter driven, not personality driven.
Okay, well, let's take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll go through some of the top PolitiFact North Carolina stories of 2022. We're talking with WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht. Welcome back to the WRAL Daily Download. We're talking with WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht about the top North Carolina fact checks of 2022. Okay, Paul, break it down for us. What was the most interesting claim on the list?
The one that stuck out to me was it was Republican on Republican crime, if you will. It comes from the U.S. Senate primary last spring on the Republican side. People might remember that former Governor Pat McCrory decided to run for the seat of retiring Senator Richard Burr, and he was ultimately beat out in that primary by Ted Budd. There was a group, I forget the name of it exactly, but they came out and did a television ad that said that McCrory, during his time as governor between 2012 and 2016, pushed critical race theory in North Carolina classrooms, and that he did so by appointing Democrats to the state's textbook commission. And the first thing that caught my attention was, well, hold on a second, critical race theory wasn't even a thing back in 2012, 2013, 2014, so on, And so I'm thinking, okay, maybe it did slip in there. And what about this appointing Democrats to the textbook commission? And there's a lot there to unpack. And what I learned, and I didn't know when I first set out to do this fact check, was that the governor does make appointments to the textbook commission, but he can only appoint someone nominated by the state education superintendent. So he can't just go and, appoint his best BFF, Republican. He has to take someone nominated by that superintendent. Well, that's an elected position too. And while McCrory was governor, the education superintendent was June Atkinson, a Democrat. So she could appoint whoever she wanted, more liberal-leaning people, and he would have to appoint them or boycott the process, essentially. And so the former is what happened. She nominated Democrats. He appointed them to this textbook commission. And then the ad was misleading it gave the impression that this textbook commission mandates what children read in the classroom. That's not what happens at all. They just approve books and put them on a menu, and then local school systems can decide, what on that menu they like, and then they can put it in their own classroom.
Was there a fact check in particular that you were surprised to see on this list?
I was surprised to see a fact check of Congresswoman Alma Adams make it to the list. And she's a Democrat. She's represented Charlotte for a long time in Washington, D.C., and she tweeted that half of the bills killed by the filibuster during a certain period of time were related to civil rights. And then I don't have it here in front of me, but it was like a 50-year period, if I remember correctly. And so, we saw this on social media. We checked it out, and it turned out to be half true. That there are different ways of counting whether this filibuster was used and what constituted a civil rights-related issue. And so scholars have different totals for how this is calculated, and that was surprising to me. I learned a lot in that fact check too, but I was just surprised to see it on the list because when I think of, the sexiest topics of 2022, I don't think the history of this filibuster.
So I know that our listeners have been very patient. What was the top fact check on your list?
Surprise, surprise. It was about inflation.
That makes sense.
And so that may not be surprising, but the person who made the claim might surprise you. It was former legislator Erica Smith. Now, she's run for higher office a couple times and hasn't been able to make it through a primary. Now, she tweeted, quote, Corporate profit margins are at their highest point in 70 years. Corporations are trying to blame inflation on stimulus checks. Meanwhile, they're overcharging us for gas, medicine, and groceries and pocketing the difference. And that's a racket, end quote. Whenever there's a number in a tweet or a claim by a politician, that immediately gets me going because I think to myself, oh, okay, well, here's something I have to measure this claim by. Oh, all right, she said it, the corporate profit margins are at their highest in 70 years. Bingo, I have a window of time to look into. The highest point, that's another superlative, so I can go look into that. And it turned out that she was half right. She was absolutely right about corporate profit margins being at their highest in 70 years. And that's according to U.S. government data. They track it. The only misleading part of her claim was where she starts getting into specifics here, like, oh, they're overcharging us for gas, medicine, and groceries and pocketing the difference. Oil companies did make a lot of money in 2022 and during the course of the pandemic, especially as things ramped back up. Medicine, we pay more for medicines than many countries. But when we spoke to economists about the price of groceries, they say, well, your typical local grocer is not making huge profits on these margins here. Like, it sort of depends on the product. It's not all the same. You buy a banana and it's 50 cents more. That's not going to make Food Lion the biggest profits in history. So it was a little more nuanced than she let on. And but I think the fact that this was number one speaks to the fact that in 2022, people were looking for an explanation for why inflation was at a 40-year high. A lot of people have pointed fingers, and people wanted to know, like, all right, is it the corporations? What is the answer here? And so from that standpoint, I hope at the time we helped answer some of those questions.
What will 2023 look like from a fact-checking perspective? Is there a difference between big election years and non-big election years? I mean, aside from the fact that you don't have a bunch of candidates out there making claims about their opponents, how do you find things to look at in years when there aren't big elections?
The nature of politics is such that a lot of these people who get elected to the legislature or to Congress or the U.S. Senate, it seems like part of their job is to take aim at the opposition almost all the time. And so in that sense, I expect to continue fact checking tweets, statements made by politicians on air about who's to blame for, I don't know, whatever, who's to blame for January 6th or inflation or whatever. So to some degree, it'll continue. I don't think the claims will be as over the top as what you see in campaign ads. But here in North Carolina, we're expecting the Republican-led legislature to redraw the congressional maps. And so that's a complicated process that a lot of people don't understand. And a lot of times when you have stuff like that that's complicated, people try to summarize it in a tweet or a Facebook post and leave a lot of stuff out that leaves room for us fact checkers to get in there and to clarify the issue. And so I think you'll see and I think you'll see claims about abortion here in North Carolina. The U.S. Supreme Court obviously revoked a woman's right to an abortion last year, and North Carolina didn't do anything, at least legislatively. And so we're going to see more Republicans take office. They're going to be one vote shy of a supermajority, and it's believed that they're going to take a look at North Carolina's abortion laws and maybe push the 20-week ban back to 15 or 12 or 10. Last year we fact-checked a claim about what they might do with the abortion laws that turned out to be, I believe it was on the mostly false side of the truth-o-meter. And I suspect we'll see a lot of that again. People making claims about what Republicans might do or what their bills might do. So, not as over the top as an election year, but there's still going to be a lot of rhetoric out there, a lot of misleading claims.
Well, we shall see. Paul, thank you for keeping people honest.
I try.
That's WRAL PolitiFact reporter Paul Specht. For his breakdown of the top North Carolina fact checks of 2022, visit WRAL.com and search PolitiFact. That does it for this episode of the WRAL Daily Download. Thanks for making us part of your morning routine. Another great way to get WRAL news is the Morning Briefing newsletter. It's a daily email that's waiting for you in your inbox every morning with Triangle news, events, and headlines to help you get ready for the day. Sign up at WRAL.com/newsletter.